All right, this one's a good one. AP European History, Unit 6, Industrialization, and a bunch of other stuff. And the etc. today is what happened to France after the French Revolution and Napoleon. Today we're going to find out. We're going to take it up right to about 1848 when revolution strikes France yet again. And what we're going to see is the restoration of the monarchy. Here, Louis XVIII to your left, who was quite a large man and in a lot of pain and found it difficult to move around. Sometimes his walking was described as waddling. Perhaps that's why the painter has him seated and holding a cane. However, what we're going to see is the restoration of a monarchy by conservatives who thought that monarchies are safe. We'll put a monarchy in, and then it got unrestored when Napoleon came back for the 100 Days. So then they had to restore it, the monarchy. So Louis was actually restored twice to the monarchy. He will die as monarch, and then we'll have another monarch come in, and he will be forcibly unrestored. We'll have to have another monarch come in, kind of a restoration of that monarchy, and then we'll have another revolution, and we'll have a republic again, and then an emperor. So we go through a lot of different phases as the French can't seem to quite get the right equation for what is good government for France. So let's dive right into Louis XVIII. A very interesting king. Known sometimes as Louis the Desired. He'll reign for 10 years. He was fairly old in his 60s when he became king. And he was the brother of Louis XVI, the one who had his head removed from his body by his guillotine. His Louis XVI's son, Louis XVII, died in prison and was never truly a king other than in name. Well, Louis will end up going into exile during the Revolution. He didn't want to see his own head chopped off, and while Napoleon was in power, he will take with him his wife, Marie Josephine of Savoy, who was not so desired by Louis. It's a sad and tragic and strangely, just sad and tragic story. When it was, of course, an arranged marriage. There were a lot of marriages between Savoy and the French royal family at this time. However, when she showed up, he found her repulsive, which is ironic considering his own waddling state. She reportedly did not use rouge. That is, as you can see in this painting, she's got rouge on her cheeks. She didn't pluck her eyebrows. She didn't brush her teeth. She didn't use perfume. And remember, this is in time people didn't bathe very much. So if you didn't cover yourself in perfume, you probably didn't smell very good. There'll have to be a lot of diplomatic work between Savoy and France to get her to the point where she takes on French ways, the ways of Versailles, as opposed to the ways of Savoy, where in Savoy, rouge was seen as a little bit inappropriate for a good lady to wear. And eventually she will take on it's even though he bragged about his marital life with her, it appears they did not complete the marriage for several years. They will not have children. She will have 2 children who will not survive. And so he will not have a direct descendant. And the throne will have to pass to his brother, Charles. Anyway, when he becomes king, he knows he can't turn back the clock. He can't be an absolutist. He can't go back to pre-revolutionary France. And so he's going to rule as a generally liked monarch, in part because he's going to be held in check by this thing called the Constitutional Charter of 1840. Constitutional Charter is something that the Allies said, hey, Louis, if you're going to be king of France, you're going to have to sign off on a type of constitution and make sure that you don't stir up any revolution. Take some of the ideas of the French Revolution that were good, put it in there, and you'll be good. Now, this will be presented as a gift from Louis to the people. And this is an important symbol that this was not written by the French people. It is not something from the French people. It is something that he is giving them as a gift. So you still see the sense of king is the source of authority, not the people. That sovereignty lies in the king, not in the people. That will be an idea that the French will wrestle with later. The Constitutional Charter itself established a liberal form of government. It was definitely a constitutional monarchy, closer to the English form of government, but not still having a fairly strong monarchy. Not really a parliamentary monarchy, but a constitutional one, limited by what the Constitution and Charter says. It protected most of the changes from the early French Revolution, before the terror, before things got weird. Toleration, religious toleration, was officially protected, although the Roman Catholic Church remained the official church. There was a two-house legislature. However, suffrage will be limited to only about 100,000 of the wealthiest males. So you're looking at nobles and the wealthy bourgeoisie. Well, with Napoleon out, it was payback time. People wanted payback for the French Revolution, and they wanted payback for what Napoleon had done. And so this campaign starts, sometimes called by historians the White Terror, and ultra-royalists. Ultra-royalists are those who want to kind of turn back the clock to an absolutist monarch. They saw a strong monarch as the best bulwark for the safety and freedom of individuals, especially individual wealthy people. So we're going to see this campaign that gets out of control. Louis doesn't want it. He's reluctant to spill blood, but this campaign to purge and kill supporters of Napoleon in the French Revolution, we don't know the numbers. A lot of it's just a matter of driving them out of their government jobs. Some of it was mob violence and murders. Some of it, there were trials. Some of the trials were legitimate trials. Some were mock trials, and it was mob justice. Painting to the top right, you see one of Napoleon's generals, Marshal Ney, executed, and you can see the troops kind of marching off into the distance as his body lies in the cold, wet street. This was not something Louis wanted, and Louis is going to find he has a lot of people who want him to become much more royalist. When the elections come in, the Chamber of Deputies was filled with ultra-royalists and reactionaries. Remember, reactionaries want to turn back the clock. They were more royalist than the king was. They'll be led by one of his relatives, the Count of Artois, who was the heir to the throne. And Louis and the Count did not get along. They did not see the future as being the same. And Charles, when he becomes king, he's going to have a problem with the French people because he wants to turn back the clock. Louis will change a bit later in years. That there'll be an assassination of the Duke of Berry, the son of Artois. Louis blames it on liberals or radicals. So you will see him doing some unliberal things. You'll see him doing press censorship, limiting what newspapers can do. Radicals will be arrested and tried for crimes against the state. High schools, which were seen increasingly as the kind of the breeding ground for radicalism, or at the very least liberalism, will be turned over to French bishops. Because remember, the Catholic Church is one of those three pillars of conservatism, and bishops are not going to teach liberalism. They will teach the young people how to be good conservatives. Well, he dies fairly old, despite the fact that he had health problems all of his life, and his brother, Charles, the Count, becomes king, and he'll have a short reign, in part because he was already old by this point as well. He will have two brother kings. He was generally considered to be the best looking of the three brothers. This painting of him to the right, later in life, while he is king, shows him sporting the new style of petite mutton chops that will become kind of popular in this era. He wanted to turn back the clock. He was a reactionary, ultra-royalist. He wanted to be an absolutist. Why? I mean, if you're going to be king, what good is it to be king if your powers are limited? So he will get some things done. For example, he forces payments to nobles who lost land during the revolution, paid for at the expense of the bourgeoisie. He tried to restore the right of the firstborn son to inherit the property of his father. That's called primogeniture. So he tried to restore primogeniture. He'll be blocked on that. He will punish sacrilege, religious sacrilege, with prison or death. But elections kept bringing in liberals and moderates. It's kind of like he has the opposite problem that Louis before him did, that he keeps getting governments that are made up of people opposed to him. Well, ultimately says, well, fine, you know what? I don't need your government. And he openly repudiated the Constitutional Charter of 1840. He said, you know what? That's a thing that can be changed. It's not set in stone. I can alter it. I can abolish it. Middle class, forget it. You know what? You're not even going to vote anymore. He will have even stronger press censorship. So what happens? We have the July Revolution, sometimes known as the Revolution of 1830. There'll be elections in 1830 bringing in a huge liberal victory. It's a huge slap in the face to Charles. At the same time, Charles has invaded Algiers, and people are wondering, wait a minute, does Charles want to create an empire like Napoleon did? We don't trust that very much. So he issues what are known as the Four Ordinances. Very illiberal ideas, no freedom of the press. He just sends the Chamber of Deputies home. He says, you know what, I don't need to talk to you. He further limits the franchise and calls for even more new elections. So the middle class rises up in what were sometimes called the Three Glorious Days in July, late July. And at the end of those 3 glorious days, Charles is like, oh, this is what happened in that previous revolution. They're going to cut my head off. So he abdicated on August 3rd after 3 days of protest and says, bye. And he flees into exile and will live out the rest of his life outside of France, which is why he is the only French monarch with his tomb in another country, in Slovenia. So what replaces Charles? The citizen king, Louis Philippe, the July monarch, who will have a nice long rule, 18 years, and will have a new title. He will not be the king of France. He will be the king of the French. A much different thing, because while he was in line for the throne, Charles had his own children to be in line for the throne. So this is kind of skipping to a different part of the family. But people don't question it because they like Louis Philippe. Louis was the Duke of Orleans. He was a cousin of Charles. He had fought early in the French Revolution. He and his father had both supported the early French Revolution. And then the Reign of Terror set in, and he was like, oh, I'm the Duke of Orleans. They don't really like nobles. They're going to kill me. So he fled, and he'll live in exile for 20-something years and will live, oftentimes, the life of a poor man. He will do what he has to earn a living. The story goes around that at one point he had no food and he sold his last horse just so he could eat. He took a job as a teacher. So he was one of us. He was the citizen king. He traveled all over, oftentimes using the fact that he was the Duke of Orleans to kind of get public charity, including the United States. He'll spend time in Massachusetts and other parts of the United States. And when the revolution comes, the French choose him. He had returned after the restoration of the monarchy, and people liked him. And you can see him also sporting those petite mutton chops. The style's set. There it is. So what does he do? At first, people loved him. They thought, this is a huge change. We're so glad to bring in the citizen king. But this caricature to the top right kind of demonstrates what happens to him in a fairly quick amount of time. The top left is, him as, king. They're like, oh, we kind of like him. And then as time goes on, he devolves into nothing but a sour pear. And his popularity quickly falls apart. As a citizen king, he avoids extravagance. He doesn't live like a king. He lives like an average guy. He saw himself as a businessman, a member of the bourgeoisie. They support him. He supports them. He accepts the Charter of 1814. He's like, yes, Charter of 1814. I support that. He adopted the tricolor. He's like, I like the tricolor. I'm all revolutionary. He even expands the charter to include more middle class in rights, and including in rights of suffrage. However, there's no real revolutionary gains. Workers who saw, hey, we're bringing in a new king. We've got hopes of change. Workers were greatly disappointed. The bourgeois. So this revolution, this July Revolution, is very much a middle-class revolution. It's for the wealthy bourgeoisie to defend their economic and political power, which was being challenged by Charles. So now they're going to bring in a king who will protect that. But the workers get nothing. And they will rise up 1831, 1832, 1834 against him. And that's where he becomes less and less citizen king and more the sour pear. He keeps Algiers. He brings Napoleon's remains back to France to rest in honor in France. Little known fact that 1832 workers' rebellion during Louis Philippe's monarchy is probably the first known appearance of Wolverine, who, as you may, if you've seen the movie, he was one of the Les Miserables. So even before he was in the Civil War as a mutant, he was in France as a mutant. Little known thing. Hopefully one day I'll see my dream of the MCU and Wolverine all in the same place. He's not dead. Well, anyway, so with Louis Philippe disappointing the workers, more and more there's going to be calls for reform, especially to help the workers. The workers rise in rebellion and they get crushed every time. And then remember, the bourgeoisie don't really want that. But more and more, his reign is being seen as one of doing nothing. Like, he became king, he's like, here's what we're going to do, and then nothing really changes. And then things get really bad for France in the mid-1840s. There'll be famines, there'll be a severe economic recession, 1846, 1847. Bread prices go way up, unemployment goes way up, and reformers are kind of inspired by England. England was starting to expand its franchise and right to vote, so why not them? So there'll be reformers wanting to expand the franchise like England had. At the same time, 1846, 1847, bourgeois liberals started holding big parties called banquets. Now, political parties were forbidden, but having a banquet where you just happen to do toasts, in which you toast liberty, equality, fraternity, the right to work, all of those things, those were not. At the same time that's going on, so liberals, bourgeois liberals, workers, all upset, socialism is finally starting to come to fruition at this time. That these socialists that we've already been talking about are now something that people are talking about. When in the first revolution in 1830, not a lot of people talking about socialism. You go back to the original French Revolution, socialism hadn't been born yet. But now people are talking about socialism, and maybe this could be a chance for real gains for the working class. Louis Philippe didn't seem to care. He might have been citizen king one day, back in the day, but now he's one of the wealthiest people in France, and these concerns don't bother him. So what's he do? He bans the banquets. He says, your banquets, those are no more. I really don't want to hear your complaints anymore. Just shut up and go away. Within a few days, he'll be gone. Workers began marching in February 22nd, 1848. There'll be battles of the barricades as workers build barricades all across Paris, blocking movement, blocking troops. There'll be times where there's open battling between police, troops. And 2 days later, Louis abdicates. He kind of saw the writing on the wall. He's like, okay, they don't love me anymore. I'm a sour pear. So I'd better get out of here before they chop my head off. So what happens? Now this is going to be, so the 1830 revolution was much more for the middle class, for the bourgeoisie. It was kind of a moderate revolution. Well, now they're going to look at some more radical ideas. And they decide, you know what? Let's not try a king. We've been trying this king thing. It's not been working for us. We've had 3 in a row. We've gotten rid of 2 of them. One of them died, and we're not sure we liked him. So let's try a republic. We tried that once. Remember that? It worked out really good. So here's what they did. And these are extremely liberal and some of them fairly radical ideas. Every adult male gets the right to vote. Suffrage for every male. Not the females, but every male. Slaves freed in all French colonies. So slavery had been already banned in France, but now all the colonies, it's banned. In addition, you'll see the abolition of the death penalty. That, hey, we're not going to kill anyone anymore. So, I mean, Louis Philippe didn't have to leave. He could have stayed. They wouldn't have chopped off his head. The 10-hour workday is adopted. Again, those ideas coming from the working class. Now, here, the middle class is like, okay, wait, hold on. That's enough. We don't need to do any more. Let's just stop there. We've expanded the right to vote. We're done. But radicals, led by this guy over to the right, Louis Blanc, were demanding this new idea, this radical idea. Blanc, being a socialist and a radical reformer, he demanded a new type of right, a right to work. That everyone should have the right to have a job and to receive pay for that job. So the middle class they compromised with the working classes. Okay, let's try this. Let's try national workshops and see how this works. So they opened up some national workshops. And the idea was basically find very simple public workshops like, hey, let's build a ditch. Let's dig a ditch. Here's some shovels. And then the next day you could fill up the ditch. Immensely popular. Immediately 120,000 people joined them. 80,000 more people applied to join them. It clearly was going to be hugely popular among the working class because they were out of jobs. They had this terrible, terrible recession. Well, new elections are held and moderates are widely brought in. It turns out, and we saw this during the French Revolution, rural areas did not trust city folk. And city folk is where you found radicals like Louis Blanc and socialists. So those rural areas came back very moderate. And they're like, well, this seems a little too far. Why can't you just, farm on the farm and get some food there? So increasingly, we're going to start seeing clashes between moderate bourgeois and moderate rural farmers and radicals. Eventually, the national workshops, the bourgeois win the day. They dissolve the national workshops. We're like, we can't do this. Why don't you just join the army instead? And that leads to several days of rebellion by the workers called the June Days, in which thousands will be killed or injured, especially in the city of Paris. But the working class does not win the day. The bourgeois wins the day again. They will write a new constitution and hold new elections. They're doing this all the time with the elections. In December of 1848, under this new Republican Constitution. And who do they elect as president of France? No one else but Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. In 4 years, the Republic will be gone, and we'll find this out next unit, and he will be Emperor Napoleon III of the Second Empire. So this brief Second Republic, fairly sad and pathetic, because the dream of national glory is stronger than helping unemployed people work. And then, of course, after Louis Napoleon, there'll be another republic. But we'll talk to that on another day. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. He's the only one that Wolverine will ever be in.